Good morning. My name is Steve Bailey. I'm a candidate for Congress in Missouri's 1st Congressional District. I'd like to talk to the voters in that district, but I think this is a matter that has national import and potentially even the international import. I want to talk about Social Security. This is the standard third rail in politics. A politician who talks about this can pretty much expect that everybody will vote against them because there may be a threat to each individual's benefit. I think, though, that we all know this has been a political football for 34 years or more. Reagan tried to modify this. They made a slight change in eligibility and beginning age. I'm 58 years old, and my beginning age is 66.5 years, where when I was born it was 65. We've raised it up to 67.5, and I think any of us realistically expect that as we live longer, Social Security will likely keep moving that date back. We're probably going to maybe begin seeing full retirement benefit at age 70 for people just entering the plan. Anyway, what I'd like to talk about is maybe an alternative where we're not completely reliant upon the returns on Treasury bills to fund Social Security. In my opinion, Congress has utilized Social Security as a backup for current spending. The Social Security Trust Fund should be separate from Congress's reach, but they're able to get in and utilize current contributions to fund current activities in the budget. And then they repay the loans to the Social Security Administration with T-bills only. As I'm going to explore utilizing an Excel spreadsheet, I think that there's an alternative to doing this, and that is that we can take part of the money out. And let me jump over and kind of show you. Well, hold on. Let me think about that. That we can take part of the money that comes in taxation as OASDI, which is the Social Security portion of our FICA taxation. Okay, and so I'm looking at, I used a search engine to find what's the current OASDI rate, and Iowa State University popped out, and it's got a very nice rate, and it basically tells us that Social Security tax rate is 6.2% on the first 118,500 wages paid. The Medicare tax rate is 1.45 on the first 200,000 and 2.35 above 200,000. What we find on Medicare is that and Social Security is that the employer pays the same rate on behalf of you. All right, so if you're self-employed, you pay all of that tax. All right, so essentially we've got 12.4% going to the federal government to fund OASDI, and we've got 2.9% going on behalf of the employer and employee to fund Medicare. This will not discuss Medicare at all. I'm trying to look at Social Security only. So let's look at how does this self-employment person's FICA tax rate for 2016. We can see it's 6.2 on the first 118,500 of net income, and then 2.9% on net income all the way up ad infinitum. All right, so the self-employed person pays both sides of the FICA and both sides of Medicare and remains fully up. All right, so my proposal is let's look at how we might differentiate funding. Now, what I've done is I've worked in a retirement. I'm teaching a class at St. Louis Community College over the next 2 weeks. Last night was my first class. It was really fun, very enjoyable. I misgauged my audience a little bit. I thought that I might attract younger people interested in saving for retirement, but I attracted a crowd that was mostly over 40 and probably 95% at or near retirement age, say within 10 years of retiring, which I probably should have expected. But anyway, one of the things I look at as we're trying to teach them about how you might retire is I look at what are the various available funds, and then I've taken long-term average yields in mutual funds of this nature or in that broad market of that kind of investment. So on an average over 50 years, even with today's low rates, we can expect money markets to return about 2% per annum. Long-term federal treasuries have a historic return of 4.3%. Now, can we expect that going forward near term? Of course not. We're at an almost zero rate in the Fed. I won't digress too much, but I think they made a mistake. They need to have a floor where they just do not go below 2%. It's put a lot of retirees at risk because we're now in a stock market that we generally call a TINA market, T-I-N-A. There is no alternative to owning stock. You know, we used to talk about you should own some bonds, which would include federal treasuries, and you probably should own something like in dividend growth or growth and income type funds, or maybe you could even accomplish it with a balanced fund, a 60% bond, 40% stock mix, which would give you, on average, you know, around a 7.25% return. The only number of all of these that I'm really confident in is the S&P 500, which is 10.52%. If we look at that over 50-year periods, that number is actually pretty solid. That's plus or minus 0.05%. Now, 50-year periods, a lot of us just can't get our head around. What are you talking about, 50-year periods? But if you start investing when you're, say, 22, 23, 24, 25, you're getting out of college, or, you know, you've finally gotten to a point where as a, you know, beginning person, you realize I got to start putting money away. You know, you may actually hold your investments if you're going to be 75. 70 years would put you at age 95. Now, I realize average age in the U.S. population is something like 76.3% for men and 79.1% for women is average life expectancy once they get over 18. But we can see that we may well hold our investments for 50, 60, 70 years. So looking at 50-year terms makes some sense. And generally, when you look at 50-year terms in any of these investments, they begin to become kind of more to a normal. The other funds we've talked about is, so here's corporate bonds, there's junk bonds, which is basically companies at or near default. But of course, because they're in financial trouble, they pay more. A fund of funds may be, it would have some treasuries, some corporate bonds, and maybe a little bit of kind of dividend growth and income. Oftentimes, these return in the 6.85% per annum. Balanced funds, here I've really targeted something that's close to a 60% stock, 40% bond, long-term return. Dividend growth, most companies that pay a dividend are interested in growing the value of their stock as well as growing the amount of their dividend. And so this gives us an opportunity. These are, in terms of mutual funds, these haven't had a long-term life, but they're about 8.10%. let me pause here and go, how does this guy who's a candidate for Congress know anything about this? I'm a university professor at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. For about 15 years, I was a trial lawyer. I left that field because truth was not something that popped up consistently in the courts, unfortunately, and decided to go into an even more truthful field, financial planning. I went out and got a certified financial planner certificate, which involves some education. It's mostly about how do individuals manage their own money through a variety of vehicles. Excellent training. Anyway, I wasn't real good at being a salesman, which is what a lot of financial planning is. But I was offered an opportunity to teach life insurance at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. I took it. Since that time, I've added courses in retirement planning and principles of insurance and risk management. And then in about the last 8 or 9 years, I've been teaching a course in legal environment of business. It may be longer than that. I've taught so many classes that I don't have a perfect track on it. And I didn't sit there and go, oh, we started this on that XYZ year. Anyway, am I an expert in this? Maybe not, but I'm probably more expert than the average Joe. I've made this my life, if you will, besides which my wife is brilliant and has done all of this research on these things. So these numbers are not perfect, but they're pretty good approximations. Anyway, we've got growth in income, which is where companies try to keep growing their stock value, and partially by growing their dividend. As they increase dividend, oftentimes their price will rise up. As a result of the TINA market we're in now, there is no alternative market. We've now got 20 PE in the S&P 500. That's kind of frightening. That signals some kind of correction coming fairly shortly. Should the Fed raise rates? The simple answer is absolutely. We should be pushing towards, by this time next year, it's September 20th of 2016, we should be at about a 1.5% rate, which would start pushing some of these lower volatility items to a higher rate. Anyway, you can look at some of this other stuff. I just wanted to give you a little background in what we're talking about. So going back, we've got 12.4% taxation. This is, once you make income, you're taxed at this level. That money goes off to the federal government. I'm not real keen on how the federal government manages my money. A lot of what they do seems real focused on making sure the interest group that party has identified gets a really fabulous deal for the money they've put in. So what I'd like to propose, and this is in contravention to my opponent. My opponent is Lacey Clay. The people who maybe see this video outside of Missouri's 1st Congressional District may or may not know Mr. Clay. Politically corrected people do, or connected people do. His father, William Clay, a great man, held a congressional seat for 32 years. That's 16 terms. I've got some issues with that constitutionally, and a lot of people ask me, hey, shouldn't we have term limits? I tell them we do have term limits. Every 2 years they stand for office, and we the people, and those are the words in the Constitution. It is not we the king giving away these powers. It's we the people granting these powers to the government. We got the right to run them out. And if we don't vote people out about every 8 years, there's no one to blame. No one to blame. Okay? 8 years in Congress is a long time. Phenomenal people who move a lot of legislation and look at things this way, that maybe they should hold that office. But, I can tell you, me personally, if the people vote for me, I'm really targeting 4 years. It's a lot of disruption in a normal life to hold a congressional seat because you got to live where you live, and you got to live in D.C. simultaneously, and you're flying back and forth. And, you know, I'd rather come home, hug my wife, hug my dogs, talk to my kids on the phone. But I'm willing to, as a citizen soldier, as all of us are, to make some sacrifices if the people think I'm worthy of their trust. I think I probably should be dressed up a little bit, but I'm wearing my United States Naval Academy t-shirt. And I think that's important because each of us in the United States is potentially a soldier for our nation. We owe our freedoms to soldiers. We owe our freedoms to those soldiers who spent 2 brutal winters in Pennsylvania, one of which was at Valley Forge, and kept the British at bay. We essentially won that war by simply continuing an army in the field for 5 years or more and eventually capturing Cornwallis. And the British are like, well, we can't replace another army. You know, we lost Burgoyne's army, now we've lost Cornwallis's, let's treat for peace. Anyway, let's jump to the topic. Sorry, that's kind of trying to introduce everything. But if we were to break our OASDI down, all right, and I'm looking only at the OASDI part, which is 12.4%. All right, so our total tax, oops, oh, what's going wrong? There we go. I don't have it all in display. That's what it is. The tax rate on OASDI is 12.4%. The top amount that we're going to get taxed on is $118,500. If we do an OASDI tax, that would be a total of $14,694 on a person earning $118,500. Because that's kind of high, I'm going to also run some other numbers. And what I've got down here is an OASDI 25. I think I'm going to publish this out to my website, which my campaign website is baileyforrep.org, B-A-I-L-E-Y, the numeral 4, rep.org. That's the entry page right there. You'll notice something interesting. This young man, I'm not really that young, 58 years old, puts his cell phone number out there. You can call me. Please don't crank call me. I'm trusting the people. Okay. But anyway, I'm going to post this probably here in the comparing the candidates. I'll add a new page and give you this website or this Excel file so you can do some more stuff with it. That way also the people taking my retirement planning class can go back in and look at some of these other stuff about saving for long-term retirement. I'm already kind of going longer than I meant to, but let me go on and look at what I'm thinking we might want to do. My proposal, which may or may not make it through Congress, may not get a moment's notice. You know, we know that a freshman congressman with no political experience may or may not be behind the 8 ball. But if we look at our original Congress, a lot of those people had no political experience, and they did a great job. They left us with the most fabulous Constitution the world's ever seen. You can compare it to Great Britain's Magna Carta, in which the king gives back some of his power. Ours says, we the people, not I the king. Blah, 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 blah. We the people. So, you know, we need to send kind of ordinary Joes, if you will, but well-prepared ordinary Joes. I've got a law degree, a CFP. My opponent didn't finish his master's degree. He has a bachelor's degree. You know, I've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 240 hours of college education. That's like 120 undergrad and 90, it's actually a little more than that, 93 hours I think is what I got for law school, and then 40 or 50 hours in becoming an educator. I got a post-degree certificate trying to become a secondary math educator. So we're seeing whether I'm any good at that or not. But if we were to take, let's say that 8% of all the money goes into a general pool, because one of the reasons we have OASDI, which is old age, survivor, and disability income. That's what OASDI stands for. So old age is the retirement benefit that most of us are looking forward to. Survivor is the worker dies. Now we can get his kids through school or her kids through school. The benefit ends at or about age 19. Then disability income. And disability income is a big part. I think this was passed in the Eisenhower administration. If not, it's around Harry Truman's time. It was working its way through Congress and eventually made it there. And disability income is a big deal because if somebody can't work, we're not giving them the farm. We're giving them enough to maybe keep the wolf from the door. They're not going to be living high on the hog. It's a pretty low benefit. But the last thing I want to do is take this benefit away from anybody who needs it. If you visit my various websites, Facebook and all that kind of stuff, let me pop back to my website. I've got a YouTube. I've recorded a bunch of videos there. I've got a Twitter account where, Twitter, at least for me, is 140 words of attack dog. I probably shouldn't go there. It's also got Facebook, and I've got a LinkedIn account. You can click on these. I think going forward, I'm going to do a lot more. I think it's worthwhile, too, to compare my website to my opponent's. My opponent has a whole bunch of pretty pictures of him hugging people, and I didn't see anything substantive on any issue. But one of the issues he does talk about substantively is that he has saved Social Security from the predations of the Republicans who wanted to pull it out of investing in Treasuries. Well, what we've got, when we invest currently in Treasuries, we're getting about a 1.1% internal rate of return. That is, our money compounds. In about 72 years, we will double what we put in. Okay, if we put that money in, because there's something called the rule of 72. You divide your interest rate into 72, and that tells you the number of years to double. So the S&P 500 at a 10.52% annual yield, internal rate of return. That money doubles every 7 years. If I put $10,000 away for 50 years, it will double about 7 times. 2 to the 7th is 1.28. And since I'm moving that times 10,000, $10,000 put away today to sit in the S&P 500 for 50 years should be $1.28 million. The key in retirement is if I can withdraw at about a 4% rate and keep my investments going in this kind of range I'm going to propose over here, the 6 to 8% fairly steady annual return. And that's why the S&P 500 is in there, because, generally the S&P 500 has a positive return every year. Yeah, it has 50% corrections. It has 40% corrections. It has a lot more 20% corrections, but it also rebounds rapidly. If we look at small caps like the tech stock bubble of 2000, we went from a $5,400 NASDAQ to about an 1,100 NASDAQ. It did not return to 5,400 until last year. So it took it a mere 15 years to recover. Whereas large company, big company stocks tend to recover within 6 to 8 months. 18 months is a pretty long recovery. Now I can digress on the long bouncing during the Depression and the World War II, and it didn't really recover full value until 1953. But then it took off like gangbusters, under the Eisenhower administration. Folks, I'm running as a Republican. The inner city Democrats are not helping the inner cities, and we need to make a change there. So the change I'm thinking about is that we would say that 8% goes to the government. Okay, they get to put it into this Treasury deal. If we get a return to historic rates on Treasuries, the money we put in should come to 1.127, 1.128, give or take, $1 million. All right, so what we put in 402, I'm pointing with my finger here, we put in 402, 900 over 42 and a half years. What I'm presuming is this is what a 25-year-old would put away. And they're going to retire with a normal retirement age now of 67 and a half. I would have to say that my real prediction is that they're probably going to get full retirement at 70 under Social Security. I don't know that, this is a third rail because congressmen like to keep coming back to Congress. Ordinary citizens want to return to their natural lives. George Washington was told, George, you ought to be president for a third term. And he said, you know what? Martha and I want to go back to the farm. And so he and Martha went back to the farm. So we take that 400 grand, and at 4.3%, again, remembering the rule of 72, that money is going to maybe double about twice or a little bit more. Let me see, I've got a calculator. It is 72 divided by 4.3 equals, I get 16.77. That can't be right. Yeah, that's right. It'll double every 16.8 years. And so over a 42 and a half year period, it would essentially double 2.6 times, something like that. All right. So this is the money going to the federal government, and this is what they would have in reserve. All right. Those of us who maybe need Social Security, this would be what they would potentially utilize. Now, they can't utilize all of it because some of it has to get off to the disability service and over to the survivor side. So we're not going to get full use of all this money. But if you had $1.12 million saved up at age 67 and a half, and you do a 4% withdrawal on that, that's about $44,000 a year, which today seems really good. It's probably not enough given inflation. And particularly if you've made $118,000, really to retire comfortably, you need about 80% of that salary, at least at the outset. You'll find that as you get older, your activities diminish, your expenses somewhat diminish, although medical care rises. You can maybe get by at about an 80% rate. Well, we're going to have to make up that shortfall somewhere, because the real purpose of Social Security retirement income is to replace income according to need. When I fill this out, we're going to maybe find that we might have enough money for the person making $40,000. What we're going to guarantee to them at this bottom end, this is what Social Security always does, is they make sure the people at the low end of the pay scale, of the average pay scale, get an 80% retirement benefit, because realistically they haven't had a chance in their life to save more. It's hard to make ends meet on 40 grand if it's a standard 4-person family. Let's be blunt. It's hard to make ends meet. It's hard to think about saving. You've got to get up into this 80, 90, 100 type range to begin saving more assiduously. And certainly at 60 thou a year, we're probably able to, but the federal government's in our pocket for 15% or more beginning around 60, 70, 80. It jumps up to 20. We've got all these rates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so what I'm thinking is, let's look at what could we do if we took 4.4% and permitted each taxpayer to have their own account which they could invest in, or in which they could invest. Better to use proper grammar. What would happen if we took that money and put it into a 6% yielding account? We could have $947,096.46. Now, of course, it's not going to be perfectly this, because to get 6%, you've got to take some market risk. And right now, the federal government actually has services that they have funds that they put their employees in that can get us 6%, 8% risk. What would all this money going into the market mean? Well, it might mean that we would actually lessen the number of rich people who own all the stock, because we're going to put more and more middle-class individuals in. We're going to have those middle-class individuals investing in the productivity of fellow Americans. This is a vastly better system than socialism, where we expect that everybody works hard and then we're going to take the money and then redistribute it. Really, socialism is a politically correct word for the ancient art of feudalism, Feudalism, where all of us work for some wealthy lord. We get King John, and he distributes the money out to the people that help King John. Socialism is a terrible failure. Capitalism is a marvelous work, even though it's unfair. It is fair to everybody who's working and able to work to their capacity. For people in disability, we've got to take care of them, but that doesn't mean we need to redistribute everybody's assets according to need. In capitalism, you get to go get it, and you can build family security on your own. I think that's a pretty good system. Now, if we were to put that money away in an 8% return, notice how much more money we get. 42 and a half years. So I've done the same thing at OASDI 35. We can see that even though we're basically getting a little more than half of what we're putting into the federal government's use, for our own use, we're getting a tremendously better return. I don't know that this stays true forever. No, it doesn't. As we begin to squeeze the margin, let me make sure I've got my years right. As we get older, if we go to OASDI 45, that is, you're beginning at age 45, we're not going to have quite as much money laid away. And I'm thinking we don't want to go beyond OASDI 55. That only 55-year-olds now would be eligible. Maybe 50 makes more sense. This is the sort of thing that we put Congress together for, because we get those 435 representatives and they hash it out. We don't necessarily get what Bailey thinks is right. We get what the people are think are right by hashing this out. So maybe this really becomes 50. I'm not sure what works. We've got to go to the actuaries at OASDI, from the Social Security Administration, to get them to tell us, hey, this might work, this won't work. You can't use 8%. You're going to have to go to 9%, but that gives you 3.4%. And, maybe if the people are amenable to a higher tax, they could go to that 4.4, but we're going to have to go to a 13.4% total tax rate. I'm not real certain. This is just to give us an idea. But I thought I'd go ahead. I've got this all set up. Let me just drag this down and show you what it looks like at each wage scale. Okay? So that potentially, if you're making $40,000 a year, you would put $3,200 towards the government. At the end, if we return to historic rates, you'd have $381,000. You'd be getting $1,760 available to you, which would, for a 25-year-old, grow to, if you're willing to take a little more risk, if you're willing to take an 8% internal rate of return, which is of course not guaranteed and not going to be steady and not going to be fixed, but pretty likely given a 50-year parameter that we would get there pretty clearly. Let me give you an example of I got a $26,000 IRA in 1991, rolled it out, and put it into the stock market. Essentially, I've been about an S&P 500 investor. If I pop back to this ready to go thing, I've pretty much held stocks in this dividend growth and income, a little bit of international, and S&P 500 for 25 years now. That $26,000 as of last week was about $234,000. And all I did was about this. I raised my pinky a couple of times, folks. I let that money go work in the economy. And so for a lot of us, the real beauty of living in the United States, the freest capitalist nation in the world, is that we might be able to get ourselves in a position where we're managing our own money, we're pulling out 4%, and the federal government would have an annuity for us. So let's just throw this $380,000 out. We might really only have 300 grand left because 80,000 of it had to go to others. I'm all for helping anybody that really needs it. I don't want to play the stuff on let's stop the scam artists. We need to be together. The reason we're free is that we had some hardy citizens who weathered those winters at Valley Forge, who went ashore at Tarawa, who crossed the Rhine, who went into Da Nang. All of this, the Marines who freed Fallujah. I still remember the ladies holding up their finger, full burqa, and here they are holding up their finger with that purple dot on it. I think we did the right thing in going into Iran, but that's neither here nor there. Our military are our great saviors. I'm just wondering if we can't arrange something where, in many ways, if I hit this $1.6 million deal, saving here, plus I'm able to, as a person making, or inside a family making more than 118,500, if I've got what I need, I might just say, hey, take this for the other people. As long as I get a relatively fair share, let's means test it that way. I don't know if this has all made sense to you. I'm trying to say that Social Security, which is going on about 3/4 of a century old, it's about as old as our failed war on drugs, is, and I think we ought to look hard at decriminalization of all substances, because that would help us with heroin overdoses due to anyway, because we get all that bad drugs in there. We would get the drug overlords maybe off the streets. We would make our inner cities a lot better. But we have not really taken a hard look at how the money is invested. And I think the money invested in Treasuries, whereas, if I'm designing a retirement portfolio for clients, I'm going to have them look at all of these things, look at their risk tolerance, see what they can do, keep working with them. And I'm going to tell them, look, probably stock is the best place to be. We can get you this kind of return. Is it guaranteed? No. But if my Social Security assets from age 25, if what I'd put away would be, $1 million, folks, I could retire right now. I'm 58 years old. I've got enough other stuff I could save up. Or if we need to have me leave it in there till 66 and a half, that's my year, fine, no problem. Anyway, that's some of my thoughts, much longer than I thought it would be. Hopefully, I talked to you about things that are really important to you. And I'm welcome, you can contact me on my Bailey for Rep. Go out here to contact. I'm also asking for donations and volunteers, but if you send me an email, I will try to get, I say I will reply within 24 hours, but right now I'm teaching 2 classes at UMSL and 1 class at Merrimack, St. Louis Community College, Merrimack campus. I've got legal environment of business there. I'm teaching an online UMSL class on legal environment of business, and I've also got principles of insurance and risk management at UMSL. And as soon as I'm done with this video, I've got to start grading. So I've got 3 tests to grade plus a small project. Anyway, thanks a lot for listening. I hope you have a great day. And remember to vote November 8th, 2016. Steve Bailey, Republican candidate for Congress, 1st Congressional District, where I think the Clay family has been there 48 years. It's time to move on. I've got ideas. Clay has pretty pictures. Thanks.